I stood there in the intensely bright Colorado sun, squinting towards the vacant location where our car had been just 10 minutes prior. My wife, Chloe, along with her companions, Isla, Stephanie, and Lauren, had disappeared. Initially, I assumed it was simply one of their foolish practical jokes. They constantly engaged in behaviors like this, pushing limits, assessing precisely how much disrespect I would endure before finally reacting explosively. After 5 years of marriage, I had become accustomed to their petty schemes. The way they would mock me, and how Chloe would participate rather than defend me. However, this instance felt fundamentally different. My cell phone remained connected to the car charger, and my wallet was stored securely in the glove compartment. All I possessed were the faded t-shirt and jeans I was wearing, accompanied by a mounting dread in my stomach as time continued to elapse. We had been participating in this road trip intended for Stephanie's lake house for 3 days already, and I had been miserable throughout the entire duration. Chloe had pleaded with me to join, suggesting it would be an opportunity to connect with her group. I was not fond of the proposition. Her companions consistently treated me as an outsider, throwing out sarcastic remarks and private jokes that I was not privy to. Nevertheless, I went along because I cared for her. Or, at least, I believed I did. The fueling station was situated completely isolated in the wilderness, merely a dusty, small rest stop located off the main highway, marked by a flickering advertisement sign and a solitary gas pump. I had gone inside briefly to use the restroom, assuming they would wait for me. They habitually waited. Yet, this particular time, they did not. An hour elapsed. I walked back and forth on the broken asphalt, kicking small stones, repeatedly assuring myself they would return momentarily. I waited for the sound of tires grinding gravel and for Chloe's voice shouting, "Caught you!" But the highway remained silent. After 2 hours, sweat was running down my neck and my throat felt parched. I continuously recalled the events of the last few days. The sly expression Stephanie wore when she intentionally spilled coffee onto my lap. How Lauren quietly whispered something to Chloe that caused her to giggle while glancing in my direction. How Isla simply observed the whole thing with her conceited little smile. I ought to have anticipated this outcome. They had clearly been preparing for some action, and I had been too foolish to perceive it. A large truck stopped, its motor vibrating loud enough to pull my focus away from my thoughts. The driver, a large man sporting a gray beard and a dirty baseball cap, leaned his head out the window. "Are you doing all right, friend?" "You've been standing there quite a while," he inquired. His tone was rough yet compassionate, and the realization struck me forcibly. I was definitely not all right. They were not going to return. Chloe was definitively not coming back. I took a deep swallow, trying diligently to maintain a steady voice. "Yes, my ride abandoned me. Do you think you could possibly offer assistance?" I requested. He nodded his head, acting as if encountering someone stranded in this area was commonplace. "Get in! Where is your intended destination?" he responded. I genuinely did not know where I was going. Back home, back to Chloe, to the life we had established. But as I climbed into the truck's cab, something profound changed within my psyche. 5 years of her mocking me, dismissing my concerns, allowing her friends to treat me like garbage. All those stored feelings surged up powerfully and intensely. I watched through the window as the gas station gradually disappeared in the side mirror. The truck driver did not press me with many inquiries, focusing instead on driving and quietly humming an old country tune. My hands tightened into fists resting in my lap. I theoretically could have borrowed his telephone, reached out to Chloe, and demanded explanations. Yet, what response would she provide? She would claim it was merely a practical joke. "Sweetheart, please don't be so overly sensitive," she would assert. I had experienced this reaction repeatedly before. Every time I voiced a complaint regarding her friends, she would dramatically roll her eyes and insist I lacked appreciation for their specific brand of humor. Perhaps I genuinely did not understand it. Perhaps I never would comprehend it. However, standing there completely isolated, forsaken like a stray canine, a vital understanding dawned on me. They did not truly understand me either. And Chloe, she would consistently choose them over me without hesitation. The trucker let me out at a junction, directing me towards Grand Junction, which was the nearest significant town. "Good luck, man," he commented, slightly touching his cap. I nodded stiffly, my throat constricted, and began my journey on foot. My shoes shuffled against the dirt, with the sun relentlessly beating down upon my head. I had no phone, no money, and no defined strategy, just myself and the limitless open road. A fraction of me desired to turn around, to plead with someone back at the gas station to contact her and rectify this situation. But a different impulse, a far more powerful one, continuously propelled me onward. I was finished with being the main object of ridicule, finished being the person they consistently laughed at. Chloe and her friends believed they had succeeded. They believed they had completely shattered my spirit. Nevertheless, as we walked toward Junction, a surprising feeling of composure settled upon me. They had failed to break me. Instead, they had effectively liberated me. I had no knowledge of what awaited me upon reaching that town. I was uncertain how I would manage to eat, where I would be able to sleep, or how I would sustain myself possessing absolutely nothing. But for the first time in numerous years, I wasn't concerned about Chloe's prospective reactions. I wasn't worried about her friend's next move. I was certainly alone, yes, but I was not incapable of helping myself. The roadway stretched infinitely ahead, completely empty, and I persisted in walking. They had abandoned me. Yet, perhaps that act was the most beneficial thing they could have done for me. Maybe this presented my true opportunity to discover who I was independent of her influence, independent of their presence. By the point when the sun commenced its descent, coloring the sky a vivid orange, I had reached a firm conclusion. I was absolutely not going back. Not back to Chloe, nor back to that prior existence. Whatever the future held was entirely mine to construct. I stood firmly at that dusty road intersection where the trucker had dropped me off. The Colorado wind generated small swirling patterns of dirt around my feet. Grand Junction lay ahead somewhere, but I lacked a reliable map, a phone, or even a single coin to my name, possessing only the clothes I wore, and a mind filled with rapidly circulating thoughts. Chloe and her friends had utterly forsaken me, leaving me without resources. And a part of me still felt compelled to find a means to contact her, to listen to her voice, to demand she immediately reverse the vehicle. But then the memory resurfaced, how she had laughed when Stephanie accidentally caused my beer to spill at the lake house. How she had simply shrugged dismissively when I pleaded with her to defend me. 5 agonizing years of that behavior. 5 years spent feeling like an uninvited guest within my own marital relationship. No, I absolutely would not contact her, not this time. I started walking toward the town, my sneakers making a grinding sound on the gravel road. The sun was still high overhead, intensely baking the ground, causing my shirt to become saturated with perspiration. I didn't know how distant Grand Junction actually was. Likely several miles, but I felt completely indifferent. Each individual step felt like a determined choice, as if I was consciously leaving her behind one footprint at a time. My thoughts kept returning abruptly to the gas station specifically, to the exact moment I emerged from that filthy restroom and noticed nothing but vacant pavement. They definitely planned this, didn't they? Chloe, Stepanie, Isla Lauren all of inside there as they rapidly drove away, believing that abandoning me would be extremely amusing. I could almost distinctly hear Chloe declaring, "He'll sort it out." He always manages to. Well, I was indeed figuring things out now, just definitely not in the manner she anticipated. A pickup truck approached noisily, and I held out my thumb, hoping someone would stop and offer a lift. The driver, a guy with a scruffy beard and a worn flannel shirt, slowed his vehicle and leaned out the window. "Require a ride?" he asked, observing me cautiously, as if he was unsure whether I presented potential trouble. "Yes, I'm heading towards Grand Junction," I replied, maintaining a steady tone. He nodded his agreement. "Jump in." "I am traveling in that direction." I quickly climbed into the passenger seat, greatly appreciative of the respite. The truck's cabin smelled strongly of motor oil and tobacco smoke, but it was certainly preferable to walking. "What exactly is your situation?" he inquired as we proceeded along the highway. I hesitated momentarily, then simply shrugged. I was deliberately left behind by individuals I mistakenly thought I could rely on. I elaborated. He responded with a grunt, indicating he had encountered similar stories previously. "That occurs more frequently than you might imagine out here," he noted. He dropped me off at the boundary of Grand Junction, near a cluster of low-lying structures and a flashing traffic signal. "Take care, man," he instructed before driving away. I remained standing there, absorbing the surroundings. A modest town featuring a blend of aged, brick businesses and modern chain establishments. People were going about their daily lives as if everything were completely normal. But for me, everything was severely wrong. No wallet, no valid identification, absolutely no method to authenticate my identity. I desperately required assistance, and rapidly. I noticed a sign designating a shelter for the homeless situated a few blocks further. A plain structure with a cross emblem painted on its side. The very idea made my stomach churn uneasily. Me, resorting to a shelter, but truly, what feasible alternative did I have? Inside the building, the lighting was poor, and the air carried the scent of strong bleach and stale coffee. A man positioned behind the counter looked up. His name badge identified him as Roy. He appeared older, approximately 50, possessing a shaven head and a strictly practical, serious gaze. "Are you lost or simply without funds?" he queried, scrutinizing my appearance. "Perhaps both," I conceded, gently rubbing the back of my neck. I was intentionally abandoned out on the highway. No financial resources, no phone, completely without anything, I explained clearly. Roy maintained his composure. "It happens frequently." "Do you have a name you can provide?" "Yes. Mike," I stated, reasoning that adhering to the truth was the easiest approach for the moment. He extended a clipboard holding a form towards me. "Complete this information. We will ensure you have a bed for tonight. Starting tomorrow, we will systematically address the remaining issues," he directed. That night, I rested on a narrow cot in a shared room occupied by numerous snoring strangers, continuously gazing up at the ceiling. My brain refused to cease its internal activity. Chloe's face repeatedly manifested in my thoughts. Her voice, her distinct laughter. I actively wanted to harbor hatred towards her, yet a fragment of my heart still longed for her to miraculously appear, to declare that the entire event had been an egregious error. However, Roy's precise words resonated deeply with me. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." He wasted absolutely no time. The following morning, He instructed me to sit down, provided a cup of weak coffee, and formulated a tangible strategy. You are going to need identification to accomplish anything substantial. Obtaining employment, setting up a bank account, whatever the need is. This procedure requires significant time, but we will initiate the application process. In the meantime, you urgently require cash resources. I nodded silently, feeling completely inadequate. Is there anywhere actively hiring? I inquired. Roy allowed a slight smirk. There is a local diner located down the street. The proprietor is a formidable older woman named Jacqueline. Mention that I personally directed you to her, he advised. The diner was a low, modest establishment titled Jackie's, equipped with characteristic red vinyl seating booth and an operational jukebox tucked into the corner. Jacqueline was working behind the counter. She was a lean woman in her 60s, notable for the tattoos winding up her arms and a vocal tone resembling rough gravel. Roy informs me, "You require employment," she stated bluntly, not even momentarily pausing from polishing the counter surface. "Yes, I absolutely do," I responded, shifting my weight nervously on my feet. "Do you have anything available?" She scrutinized me intensely, as if attempting to penetrate my very being. "The dishwasher abruptly quit yesterday. The compensation is poor. The work hours are lengthy. If you dare to pilfer anything from me, you are finished. Begin immediately." I blinked in surprise, momentarily taken aback, but confirmed with a nod. "All right, I accept the position." She tossed an apron in my direction, and just like that, I found myself diligently scrubbing plates in the rear section, hot water irritating my hands. It wasn't an impressive job, but it represented something genuinely mine. No, Chloe, no insulting friends marking me, just myself and an immense quantity of soiled dishes. Roy paid a visit later, that same week, assisting me with submitting the necessary documents for a replacement identification card. "You are managing quite well, Mike," he commented, offering a supportive pat on my shoulder. I still harbored doubts. Yet, I continued pushing forward. The shelter rapidly became my temporary residence. Jacqueline's diner served as my crucial lifeline. I made no attempt to contact Chloe. I didn't even consider trying. Each night, I collapsed into exhausted sleep, but it was a satisfying, productive type of fatigue. I was actively rebuilding my life entirely from scratch, and the feeling was growing that perhaps, just potentially, I could successfully navigate this situation. I woke up daily on that shelter cot experiencing the same dull back pain, surrounded by the consistent noise of snoring and coughing from the other men nearby. A few weeks had elapsed since Chloe and her friends callously abandoned me at that gas station. I was still adapting to this new existence, scrubbing dishes diligently at Jacqueline's diner, sleeping in a borrowed bed, and wearing donated clothes. My hands were irritated and raw from the constant exposure to hot water and soap. However, I didn't truly mind the discomfort. The hard labor kept me fully occupied, keeping my thoughts away from her. Roy had proven himself to be an absolute pillar of support, guiding me through the complicated procedure of obtaining replacement identification. It requires a certain amount of time, he had assured me, handing over a thick stack of bureaucratic documents. But eventually, you will achieve it. I nodded my head, profoundly appreciative of his rough but kind manner, and persistently moved forward. The diner now encapsulated my entire existence. Jacqueline permitted no slacking. She'd bark orders from the counter, her sharp eyes catching every mistake. "Accelerate your movements, Mike. We don't possess unlimited time," she would loudly admonish. Despite the harshness, there was no actual malice in her tone. I worked double shifts whenever feasible, carefully accumulating currency in a small envelope concealed beneath my cot. My first paycheck was meager, but it was sufficient to buy an inexpensive prepaid cell phone from the gas station down the street. I held the device in my hands, noting the plastic's pristine appearance, and experienced a surge of something akin to genuine pride. It was certainly not luxurious, but it belonged solely to me. Purchased entirely with my own earned money, not Chloe's funds, nor anyone else's resources. I had successfully reached a point where I no longer required her presence. Then the telephone calls commenced. I had possessed the phone for only one day when it vibrated audibly in my pocket while my arms were submerged deep in soapy water. I dried my hands hastily on my apron and retrieved the phone. Chloe's contact number illuminated the display screen. My stomach immediately sank. I permitted the phone to ring, observing it intensely as though it might physically harm me, until it automatically transferred the call to voicemail. 1 minute later, the notification icon for a message appeared. I knew I should have refrained from listening, but one proceeded regardless. Her voice played back, sounding tentative and strained, suggesting she had carefully rehearsed her words. "Mike, where exactly are you? We genuinely waited for you. It was purely meant as a joke. We're so worried. Please contact me immediately," the recording pleaded. I remained standing there, gazing into the sink basin, the water continuously running. Worried, they'd left me in the middle of nowhere with nothing. If they'd truly waited, they'd have come back by now. The phone vibrated again shortly thereafter. This time, the caller was Stephanie. I hit play on her voicemail, and her tone was drastically different. Completely self-satisfied and casual. "Come on, friend. You absolutely must concede that the whole situation was hilarious. Call us back. Seriously, hilarious." I gripped the telephone so vigorously that the skin over my knuckles turned stark white. That's what I was to them, a recurring joke. A funny anecdote to share and laugh about while drinking at the lake house. More calls came after that. A massive influx of communication. Chloe again, subsequently Lauren, and then Stephanie, accumulating text messages and voicemail notifications. "We genuinely miss you. Where have you gone?" This ceased being amusing a while ago. I scrolled slowly through every message, my chest feeling constricted, my head swirling with confusion. Chloe's chosen words consistently echoed: insincere anxiety, feigned distress. She genuinely did not care. None of them truly cared. That evening, I sat deliberately on my cot, the shelter environment peaceful except for the slight creaking of springs and the consistent low hum of the heating apparatus. The phone illuminated in my hand, displaying their cumulative messages across the screen. I listened to Chloe's initial message again, then Stephanie's, followed by one from Lauren that contained only her brief laughter before abruptly disconnecting. My finger hovered uncertainly directly above the option to call. A part of me intensely wanted to dial Chloe's number to scream accusations at her, demanding to know the reason for her actions. But what realistic difference would that action make? She'd just laugh it off or start crying and successfully manipulate me into feeling culpable precisely as she always managed to achieve. I had spent numerous years tolerating their nonsense, maintaining a pleasant facade because I mistakenly believed that was the required behavior of a suitable husband. That period was definitively over. I systematically reviewed the full list. Chloe, Stephanie, Isla, and Lauren digitally blocked every single contact. My finger trembled slightly as I executed the command, but immediately upon its completion, the phone fell completely silent. No further buzzing, no more deceptive communication. I leaned back securely against the wall, releasing a deep, breath I hadn't realized I was holding in. It felt exactly like severing a restrictive rope that had entangled me for a period of years. They were now incapable of reaching me. They were unable to dictate the conclusion of this narrative. I was the one deciding. The following day, I returned to the diner acting as though nothing significant had occurred, submerging my hands into the dishwater, letting the heat dissipate the lingering sound of their voices inside my head. Jacqueline, however, detected my unusual quietness. "You're particularly silent today," she noted, tossing me a drying cloth for wiping the counter. "Experiencing difficulties?" I responded with a shrug, deliberately choosing not to elaborate on the situation. "Just dealing with a few personal matters," she reacted with a sharp snort. "As long as it doesn't negatively impact my kitchen operations," I managed a slight smile at her pragmatic response. She displayed no concern for my personal drama, focusing solely on the job requirements. This approach was remarkably refreshing. Roy stopped by later, presenting me with an official document detailing the case number for my identification replacement. All right. I responded affirmatively with a nod. Yes, better than my initial expectation. He offered a supportive clap on my shoulder and then departed, leaving me to my work. By the end of that week, I had managed to save enough money to acquire a used jacket retrieved from the Shelter's available donation collection. It was far from stylish, but it successfully provided protection from the cold air. I returned to my cot every night, the prepaid phone completely silent within my pocket, feeling distinctly lighter. Chloe and her associates were definitively removed, eliminated entirely, like discontinuing a harmful habit. I didn't need their apologies or their excuses. I had work, a bed, a plan, small things, but they were entirely my own achievements. The emotional pain persisted, the deep hurt of betrayal, but its intensity was steadily diminishing. Every dish I cleaned, every dollar I managed to save. I was actively constructing something fundamentally new, something they lacked the power to interfere with. And for the very first time in a considerable period, I successfully fell asleep without recurring dreams involving her. I had been consistently employed at the diner for months now, and the overall situation was beginning to feel firmly established. It wasn't perfect, but it possessed stability. The shelter still functioned as my base, but I'd accumulated sufficient savings to transition into a minuscule studio apartment situated directly above a local laundromat in Grand Junction. It was not spacious, consisting merely of a single room containing a sagging mattress, a basic hot plate cooking appliance, and a bathroom so compact I could hardly rotate within it. Nevertheless, it was entirely mine. No longer using shared cots. No more communal snoring from strangers. Just a personal key in my pocket and a door that I had the ability to securely lock. Jacqueline had clearly observed my dedication to hard work at the diner and had promoted me to the position of prep cook, which naturally resulted in increased working hours and slightly higher earnings. I'd spend time chopping various onions and carefully peeling potatoes in the back area, the rhythmic motion of the knife keeping my hands engaged and my thoughts quieted. It required demanding physical labor, but the feeling was satisfying, like I was genuinely acquiring something of value. However, the evenings remained challenging occasionally. I'd lie flat on that squeaky mattress, gazing intently at the damp stains marring the ceiling, and Chloe would inevitably infiltrate my mind. I'd vividly recall her specific smile, hear her particular laugh, not the harsh, cruel one she reserved for her friends, but the gentle one she'd give me back when circumstances were positive. In the past, before I became the target of her mockery, I would often speculate about her current activities, whether she ever genuinely missed me, or if she even maintained a level of concern. The profound sense of loneliness occasionally struck intensely. A deep, cold sensation in my chest that wouldn't dissipate. But then the morning would inevitably arrive, and I'd forcibly drag myself out of the bed, put on my jacket, and make my way promptly to the diner. There was no longer any apprehension regarding her scrutiny, no cruel, sharp criticisms from her frenzy. I mail, frito exist. One night subsequent to a particularly lengthy work shift, I was casually manipulating my prepaid phone, feeling both bored and agitated. I maintained its simplicity, no stored contacts, absolutely no connection to my past. But my inherent curiosity eventually overwhelmed my resolve. I intentionally created a fabricated social media account using a random username and omitting any photograph, and proceeded to search for her profile. Chloe's specific profile appeared instantly. It was still accessible to the public and still showcased her seemingly perfect, curated existence. The profile included photographs from the recent lake house excursion and Stephanie striking poses near the body of water, Isla flashing a wide smile while holding a beverage. Then, I spotted a specific post directed about me. It consisted of an old photograph of the two of us smiling together at some picnic years ago. And her accompanying text struck me forcefully, similar to a physical blow. Feeling the absence of my love, I sincerely hope he discovers his way back to me, the caption emphatically declared. I stared fixedly at the image, my thumb immobilized on the screen. Missing me? She hadn't even attempted to come back and locate me. She had deliberately driven away, abandoning me to struggle and suffer. I nearly burst into laughter right there inside that grim apartment. The sound would have reverberated dramatically off the bare walls. It was intensely artificial, so characteristic of Chloe, depicting herself as the tragic victim, suggesting I had simply wandered off on my own volition rather than being brutally left behind. I scrolled quickly through the appended comments. Stephanie's input read, "He will certainly reappear. Do not worry about it." Lauren contributed, sending you supportive embraces, and the entire spectacle made my stomach revolt. They were clearly all complicit in this deceit, participating in this elaborate fabrication as if I were the villainous one. I shut down the phone and violently threw it onto the mattress, nervously raking my hands through my hair. She had absolutely not changed. None of them had evolved. But I certainly had changed. I wasn't the guy in that picnic photo anymore. The man who would grin and accept the abuse while they consistently tore down my dignity. I was fundamentally someone different now, a person entirely unknown to them. The next morning at the diner, I remained quiet, notably more withdrawn than typical, still mentally processing the things I had witnessed. Jacqueline immediately noticed my state. Naturally, she was always acutely observant. "You appear as though someone just harmed your pet dog," she remarked, pushing a plate of French fries towards me during a momentary lull in business. I offered a small shrug, selectively eating the offered food. Just engaging in excessive contemplation, I clarified. She arched an eyebrow, her heavily tattooed arms crossed expectantly. "Concerning what exactly? That former partner of yours?" she asked directly. I froze instantly, surprised she had accurately guessed the subject. I had previously only shared fragments and isolated details of the full story. Yes, I acknowledged. I saw something posted online. She is presenting herself as the injured party in the situation. Jacqueline let out a loud, sharp snort. She sounds precisely like a truly problematic person. "You are well rid of her, kid," she advised decisively. I nodded silently, managing a minimal smile. She spoke the truth. Good riddance indeed. My commitment to work kept me firmly grounded. I regularly sliced vegetables, flipped ground meat patties when the primary cook required assistance, and meticulously wiped clean the service counters anything necessary to keep actively moving. The diner possessed its set of established patrons, individuals who would acknowledge me with a nod or intentionally leave a few extra dollars on the table surface. And that experience felt genuinely positive, like I was now a recognized element of something larger. My hands had developed calluses now, and my arms were notably stronger from the regular hauling of heavy crates and intense scrubbing of cooking pans. Occasionally, I would catch my own reflection in the diner's polished glass doors. It showed tired eyes and unkempt hair, yet the image was of a man succeeding, navigating life one single day at a time. Chloe's digital post slowly faded away from my conscious thoughts, effectively superseded by the loud sound of plates clattering and Jacqueline's typically rough voice shouting orders. I discontinued checking her social media presence after that revelation. I felt no need to revisit it. Regardless of whatever she was proclaiming, whatever elaborate narrative she was fabricating, it held no significance anymore. I had my compact studio, my reliable employment, and my life humble beginnings, assuredly but consistently developing. The underlying loneliness still emerged periodically, particularly during quiet nights when the laundromat below produced a consistent mechanical hum and rattle, but its intensity was significantly reduced. I'd wake up to the distinct smell of laundry detergent subtly wafting through the floorboards, pull on my boots, and head out into the typically cold morning atmosphere. There was nobody waiting to ridicule me. No one present to roll their eyes in response to every statement I made. I was simply allowed to exist as Mike Uncomplicated, ordinary Mike, and that realization was entirely sufficient. For the first time in many years, I felt definitively grounded on solid terrain, rather than slowly sinking into metaphorical quicksand. True freedom was not characterized by loudness or ostentation. Freedom consisted of this reality, my personal apartment key, my consistently earned paycheck, and the power of my own choices, and I was absolutely unwilling to relinquish that control. I had maintained residence above the operational laundromat for an extended period now, settling into a daily routine that felt genuinely self-determined. Working shifts at the diner, systematically saving my income, sleeping comfortably in my own designated space. The days blurred into one another, yet they were fundamentally positive days, marked by stability. Then, she entered the premises. Sienna, she commenced visiting Jacqueline's diner twice weekly, consistently occupying the very same windowside booth, always accompanied by a significant pile of medical textbooks and a pen actively held in her hand. I deduced she was a medical student, based on her consistent habit of silently mumbling complex medical terminology while diligently taking notes. Her customary order never deviated, a Denver omelette, specifically excluding tomatoes, accompanied by extra quantities of coffee. She would rarely glance up when I delivered the meal. I would occasionally observe her, finding amusement in how thoroughly engrossed she became in her studies that her fork would suspend midway to her mouth for a full 60 seconds before she acknowledged its position. I remain uncertain why I initiated playing small tricks on her. Perhaps I was experiencing boredom. Maybe I simply desired to determine if I could provoke a smile from her. I frequently exchanged my official name tag with arbitrarily invented names. Bob one day, Steve the next, Carl after that, simply to see if she would become aware of the change. Initially, she didn't catch on, too deeply absorbed in her books. But one specific morning, I approached her table with the name Rusty conspicuously pinned to my shirt. And she finally raised her gaze. Her eyes narrowed slightly, quickly darting to inspect the tag, then immediately back to examine my face. "Your designated name tag is incorrect," she stated. Her voice soft but authoritative, delivered as if she were formally diagnosing a condition. I grinned widely, taken by surprise. "Is that so?" I retorted, despite knowing the tag was indeed wrong. My actual name was Mike, and she had never inquired about it. She produced a very slight smirk and immediately returned her attention to her detailed notes. That interaction constituted our first genuinely meaningful moment, and the memory persisted with me. My work successfully kept me busy, yet Sienna rapidly became the anticipated high point of my weekly schedule. She'd show up, order her usual selection, and I'd find excuses to visit her table refilling her coffee supply, efficiently removing her finished plate, or simply asking if she needed anything further. She'd nod or mumble a thanks. But that specific smirk remained vividly in my thoughts, like a personal challenge directed at me. One day, she entered the diner appearing visibly stressed and fatigued, her hair disheveled, and her stack of books notably heavier than usual. A difficult evening. I inquired gently, placing her coffee mug down. She exhaled deeply, tenderly rubbing her eyes. "Examinations. I haven't slept properly in 2 full days," she lamented. I nodded sympathetically, choosing not to press for further detail, but I discreetly positioned an extra hash brown on her plate while her attention was diverted. She noticed the addition, glanced up at me momentarily, and stated, "You are quite deceptive." I merely responded with a slight shrug. "I must somehow ensure you remain alert," I replied. Our very first outing together was completely unplanned. She arrived late one evening, dressed differently in jeans and a smart top, rather than her typical utilitarian sweatshirt, and informed me that her planned companions had canceled a booking at an upscale pizza establishment located across town. I refused to let the reservation go to waste. She mentioned, partly speaking to herself, then looked directly at me. "Are you available?" "Sure, Sked." I was actively wiping the counter surfaces, my work shift nearing completion, and Jacqueline was within audible distance. "Proceed, young man," Jacqueline barked, gesturing dismissively. "You are of no utility to me if you stand around looking gloomy." Consequently, I went with her. We shared a pepperoni pizza and a communal pitcher of soda beverage. And she genuinely laughed a full, heartfelt laugh when I recounted the story regarding my changing name tags. "I always knew your name wasn't Rusty," she confessed, her eyes sparkling brightly. "You simply aren't old enough for that name." We conversed extensively throughout the evening about her ongoing medical school pressures, my job routine at the diner, and insignificant subjects like favorite motion pictures. The exchange flowed easily and felt completely natural, as though we had possessed a deep acquaintance for an indefinite period. 6 months following that night, she officially relocated into my modest studio apartment. The space was undeniably confined. Her extensive collection of textbooks occupied fully half the available area, and we frequently bumped into each other while preparing meals on that miniature hot plate. But I remained unconcerned. She'd study late into the night, her reading lamp casting a glow while I slept, and I'd wake up to the sound of her quietly reciting anatomical terminology in her slumber. It was surprisingly soothing. A year later, we secured a significantly larger residence together, a proper apartment featuring a dedicated kitchen space and a sofa that didn't carry the distinctive odor of bleach. Sienna presented a clear contrast to Chloe. She never mocked me, nor did she make me feel inherently inferior. Whenever I expressed self-doubt, she'd simply affirm, "You possess the capability to handle this," and somehow I genuinely believed her statement. We regularly prepared meals together, watched classic television programs, and playfully disputed whose responsibility it was to clean the dishes left in the sink. The life we shared was straightforward, yet it was distinctly ours. Concurrently, Chloe steadfastly refused to disengage. She initiated sending me messages via electronic mail. She had somehow managed to discover my current mailing address, likely retrieved from an outdated utility, bill, or a similar document. The first message arrived just weeks after Sienna officially moved in, appearing on my phone display while I was focused on chopping peppers at the diner. Mike, I simply desire reassurance that you are fine. I miss you. We all do. The content read. I paused, staring intently at the message, my knife motionless above the cutting board. She missed me? She had ruthlessly abandoned me at a remote gas station with zero resources, then laughed about the incident with her friends, and now she claimed to miss my presence. I promptly deleted the email without sending any response. More messages followed subsequently. Some were concise, others quite lengthy, all heavily imbued with the artificial sweetness she had perfected. I acknowledge my error. I sincerely messed up. Please speak with me. I even contacted your grandma. She is actively worried about you. One message falsely alleged. I read them over, felt that familiar, lingering tightness in my chest, and then quickly hit the delete button. Sienna observed me once, frowning intensely at my phone. Who is that contacting you? Je inquiète. Nobody important, I replied, and she respected my boundary by not pushing the issue. She understood implicitly. I was irrevocably committed to not returning to the past. Life alongside Sienna was excellent, surpassing the happiness I thought I deserved. The entire diner operation was functioning smoothly. My hands remained steady and capable. And Chloe's persistent emails were merely distracting background noise that I could easily ignore. I'd built something new, something solid. And every passing day spent with Sienna served as definitive proof of this success. She'd lightly tease me about my culinary efforts. I'd return the favor by laughing at her notoriously poor singing. And we'd drift off to sleep closely intertwined on that acquired secondhand sofa. Chloe was welcome to continue writing whatever she wished. I owed her absolutely nothing at all. My entire world was currently centered right here with Sienna, and I was determined not to let go. I stood within the kitchen area of Jacqueline's diner, turning over a hamburger patty on the hot grill, the distinct sizzling sound filling the confined space as cooking grease splattered lightly onto my protective apron. Circumstances had been favorable, in fact, better than simply favorable. Sienna and I had successfully settled into our newer apartment, which represented a clear advancement from the small, cramped studio located above the laundromat. This apartment featured a standard-sized bedroom, a functional stove that thankfully did not emit smoke, and a window allowing genuine sunlight penetration. My life felt firmly established, as if I had ultimately escaped the detrimental situation Chloe and her friends had forced me into. My work also maintained a commendable consistency. I'd been at the diner for a sufficiently long time that Jacqueline had begun entrusting me with responsibilities beyond basic dishwashing and simple food preparation. She commenced relying on my capabilities, exhibiting less shouting and offering more affirming nods when I successfully completed tasks. On that particular day, however, she summoned me directly to the counter during a brief period of reduced activity, her sharp, focused eyes fixed directly on me, indicating she had something of considerable importance to communicate. "Mike," she began, drying her hands on a cloth. "You are surprisingly competent at this work." I allowed a slight smirk, assuming she was making a joke, but her facial expression remained completely serious. "I am scheduled to launch a second establishment across town, a smaller operation. But I require an individual to manage its daily functions. Are you interested? She asked pointedly. I instantly froze, spatula still grasped in hand, the hamburgers gently sizzling behind my back. Me, given the opportunity to operate a diner. I had certainly progressed from cleaning plates to cooking food, of course, but assuming management control over an entire business location. Are you being serious? I inquired, my voice sounding more strained than intended. She let out a brief snort. Do I appear to be joking to you? You possess the necessary skills. Work diligently. Do not steal from the till. Do not complain constantly. Provide a clear yes or no response. My head began to spin rapidly. Just 1 year prior, I had been unceremoniously dumped at a remote gas station with absolutely nothing. Now, I was being extended this remarkable opportunity. I nearly declined the offer, convinced internally that it represented some elaborate deceptive scheme mirroring Chloe's past practical jokes. Tate vevning. I sat on our sofa, which I now considered truly mine, staring blankly at the television without actually absorbing the content. Sienna returned home from an intense, late study session, deposited her bag near the entrance, and noticed me sitting motionless. What is the matter? She asked gently, removing her footwear. I informed her about Jacqueline's offer, my voice deliberately lowered, as if articulating the words might potentially jinx the outcome. She wants me to take charge of running her new diner location. Me, placed directly in command. Sienna gently lowered herself onto the couch next to me, her knee lightly touching mine. And you are currently contemplating rejecting the offer. She deduced correctly, reading my emotional state as she always did effortlessly. I responded with a shrug, gently rubbing the back of my neck. I honestly don't know the answer. What if I make significant errors? I voiced my concern. She firmly took hold of my hand, her grip reassuringly secure. You're already effectively managing half of that current location anyway, assisting with customer orders. Successfully fixing issues when she's yelling at someone else. Simply formalize the role. You are entirely capable of handling this responsibility. Her persuasive words struck me profoundly, like a forceful encouragement I hadn't realized I urgently required. She exhibited absolutely no doubt in my abilities. Not even for a fleeting moment. And that feeling was entirely unfamiliar, somewhat strange, and overwhelmingly positive. Chloe would have undoubtedly laughed dismissively, perhaps asking something like, "You, a manager?" And her friends would have quickly joined in the mockery. But Sienna simply maintained eye contact, looking at me with unwavering certainty, and I confirmed my decision with a nod. "Okay, I am going to accept the position," she responded with that subtle smile I cherished, and gently rested her head onto my shoulder. "That is good. Now, cease dwelling on the situation. We have dishes requiring attention." I laughed softly, the heavy emotional weight slightly receding. And we collaboratively washed the remaining dishes. She humming an off-key melody, while I playfully splashed water at her. The following day, I communicated my yes to Jacqueline. She responded with a grunt, indicating she had anticipated that exact response, and immediately presented me with a set of operational keys. "Ensure you do not accidentally incinerate the establishment," she cautioned, before returning her focus to counting the accumulated cash. The newly acquired diner was a humble, unpretentious establishment. It featured metal tables, a simple counter area, and a kitchen space barely sufficient for two people, but its operation was fully entrusted to me. I started the following week by establishing staff schedules, submitting necessary supply orders, and actively cooking whenever the service line became overwhelmed. Initially, the situation was chaotic. Waitresses forgot specific customer orders, and I accidentally burnt one entire batch of fries. But I systematically managed to resolve the difficulties. Sienna's assessment was correct. I had been performing these managerial tasks already, just without the official title. The establishment began operating efficiently, with regular clientele consistently arriving, and Jacqueline even paid a supervisory visit once, nodding like she approved. "Not entirely bad, young man," she commented. And I experienced a feeling of self-worth greater than I had felt in years. Then Chloe's recurrent emails resumed. I was occupied at the new diner, verifying inventory levels on my phone, when the message abruptly appeared. "Mike, your grandmother has been actively inquiring about your well-being. Please assure us that you are still alive," the email requested. My stomach felt a sudden, unpleasant twist. Grandma, she had consistently been kind, even continuing to send me greeting cards after my marriage to Chloe. But Chloe invoking her name now was clearly a manipulative tactic. It represented a contemptible effort to reel me emotionally back in. I visualized her drafting the message, feigning sadness, attempting the customary guilt trip. I immediately deleted the message, pressing my thumb violently onto the screen. She absolutely did not possess the right to use my grandmother as leverage against me. Not after the extent of her betrayal. I admittedly hadn't contacted my family recently, but I would address that myself, not through her coercive interference. I forcefully channeled my energy into managing the diner following that incident, diligently keeping my hands occupied to prevent my thoughts from straying. The business was steadily increasing its activity, truck drivers stopping regularly, local residents engaging in friendly conversation with me as if I were one of their own. I'd come home to find Sienna studying diligently at our kitchen table, her books widely dispersed, and she'd always inquire about my workday. "Good," I'd consistently reply, and truly mean the assessment. We'd collaboratively prepare dinner, nothing extravagant, typically just simple pasta or hamburgers, and discuss her academic courses, the events of my day, and our joint future aspirations. Chloe's persistent emails continued to accumulate, filling up my digital trash folder, but I refused to open or read them. She had become a mere phantom, an inconsequential shadow I possessed the ability to completely disregard. My tangible life was right here now, the thriving diner, Sienna, the jangling keys in my pocket. I had been abandoned previously, forced to independently resolve my predicament, and I had successfully done so. Now, I was constructing something vastly superior, something permanently beyond their destructive reach. Every night, upon securing the diner, I would drive directly home to Sienna, experiencing the sensation of a man who had finally achieved genuine stability. I was skillfully preparing eggs in the kitchen of my third diner location, the one situated strategically at the outskirts of town, when my phone vibrated noticeably within my pocket. The typical morning rush period was in full frenetic swing truck drivers loudly demanding more coffee, waitresses swiftly moving between occupied tables, and I almost decided to simply ignore the persistent vibration. 15 years had fundamentally transformed me into an entirely different person. Sienna and I were officially married. We had two lively children who regularly caused chaos in our house. 3 separate diner locations successfully maintained my constant busy schedule. Life felt positive, noisy, and complete, entirely unlike the hollow shell of a person I had been when Chloe had forsaken me at that remote gas station. I quickly dried my hands on my apron, retrieved my phone, and immediately saw the notification. It was a LinkedIn alert. An individual examined your user profile 27 times earlier today, the message explicitly stated. My stomach performed a small, uneasy lurch. I rarely utilized LinkedIn, maintaining only a basic profile featuring my name, the diner businesses, and a slightly out-of-focus photograph Sienna had insisted I use. But 27 times that activity level was entirely anomalous. I tapped the alert to open it, the grill hissing loudly behind me, and there she was immediately, Chloe. Her name struck me abruptly, like a sudden cold deluge, right there visible on the screen, tied to some corporate entity I cared nothing about. 27 views logged within a single day. She'd been exhaustively scrutinizing the details of my life, repeatedly. I deliberately set the phone down, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, striving to regain my composure. 15 years had passed, and yet she was back again. Back, insidiously creeping in like a persistent shadow I had believed I successfully banished. I turned the frying eggs, barely observing them, my mind overwhelmed with questions. What precisely was her motivation? Why resurface now? I'd blocked her emails years ago, ignored her guilt trips, built a whole world without her. Here she was poking ahun, silent outwardly, malaudinain mots. The diner smelled like bacon and syrup, the incessant clatter of ceramic plates maintaining my connection to the present reality. I plated the prepared eggs, passed them swiftly to a waiting waitress, and attempted to restore my focus. Coffee needed immediate replenishment. Hash browns were dangerously close to burning, but Chloe's distinct name stubbornly occupied my attention. I pictured her sitting somewhere, clicking my profile, seeing the diners. Maybe even the old job at Jacqueline's I'd listed. Did she know about Sienna or the existence of our kids? I hadn't posted much information, just enough to look professionally credible. But 27 views unequivocally signified she was conducting an intensive investigation. I quickly wiped my forehead, perspiration mixing with the intense ambient heat, and picked up the phone once more. Her profile picture stared directly back at me. Chloe, visibly older now, her hair styled short, featuring a forced, tight smile in her photograph. The description noted her as a consultant. I declined to read any further details. I actively did not want to know. I retreated into the back area, a minuscule storage room containing shelves stacked with flour and canned provisions, and leaned heavily against the wall. My heart was rapidly pounding far too quickly, as if I had just completed a punishing physical run. 15 years, 2 children, a devoted spouse, a flourishing business, and yet she still possessed the power to emotionally unsettle me. I detested that weakness. I had expended immense effort to suppress her memory, to consciously forget the remote gas station, the sound of their laughter, and the way she had successfully made me feel utterly insignificant. Now she was back, not even communicating verbally, merely observing my life. Was she jealous? Math, desperate? I ran my hands through my hair distractedly, pacing restlessly within the confined space. A component of my resolve urged me to send her a direct message. What precisely is your objective? But I immediately stopped myself. That action was exactly what she desired, for me she attacked, affording her an appropriate life. I returned promptly to the grill area, throwing myself completely into the demanding rush period cooking, pouring beverages, meticulously cleaning tables. Whenever the waitresses got swamped, the regular customers offered me supportive nods. One specific patron requested an extra portion of ketchup, and I maintained my pace, keeping my hands fully occupied, but her presence persisted. Deep in the recesses of my consciousness, those 27 profile views felt like an irritating sensation I couldn't alleviate. I made the deliberate choice not to mention the incident to Sienna upon returning home that night. She was situated on the sofa, methodically folding accumulated laundry, while The children were yelling upstairs about some game. A busy workday? She inquired, casually, briefly raising her gaze. Yes, I replied, forcing a pleasant expression, and kissed her forehead. The usual routine. She wisely chose not to inquire further, simply handing me a pile of socks to carefully organize. And I sat there, diligently folding, feigning that everything was perfectly normal. The house interior was pleasantly warm, infused with the fragrance of dinner chicken and rice, Sienna's reliable meal choice. And the children rapidly descended the stairs, immediately begging for dessert. I chuckled softly, firmly declined their request. The feeling of normalcy persisted momentarily, but Chloe remained a persistent presence, a phantom I couldn't completely dispel. I consciously avoided checking LinkedIn again. There was no necessity to determine if she had performed further searches. 27 views provided ample information. I assisted Sienna with washing the dishes, my hip occasionally brushing against hers, and actively attempted to release the lingering unease. My entire life was firmly established here. 2 children squabbling over the final cookie, a wife who didn't laugh at me. Diners that I had successfully established from absolute scratch. Chloe fundamentally lacked the ability to damage this life. Not genuinely. Nevertheless, I retired to bed that night with her name still echoing in my thoughts, staring fixedly at the ceiling, while Sienna peacefully slept beside me. The following day, I was actively pouring coffee at the very first diner when my phone vibrated once more. I avoided looking at the screen, just pushing the device deeper into my pocket. If the communication originated from her, I truly didn't want to know the content. I'd spent years locking her out, and now she was subtly attempting contact, quiet but relentlessly persistent. I concentrated fully on my demanding work: the grill, the service counter, the cash register operations. I kept my hands constantly in motion, maintaining a steady vocal tone. She was out there somewhere in the external world, but I was firmly rooted here, maintaining my strength. Whatever her goal was, whatever manipulative strategy she was employing, I was not going to yield to the temptation. Not right now. Not ever, if I could successfully prevent it. I was meticulously wiping down the main counter surface at the original diner location, the specific one where Jacqueline had first employed me when the front door chimed, and they all 3 entered: Chloe, Stephanie, and Isla. This entrance occurred precisely 3 days subsequent to the LinkedIn notifications, and I had been continuously tense, partly anticipating an event like this. The typical morning breakfast surge had just subsided, leaving only a small group of regular patrons quietly sipping coffee. The air notably dense with residual cooking grease and the smell of slightly burnt toast. I observed them before they became aware of my presence. Chloe's recently cut short hair reflected the available light. Stephanie's characteristic, confident demeanor was still visibly present. Isla remained hunched over, conveying a desire to simply vanish entirely. My abdomen twisted uncomfortably, my hands momentarily frozen on the cleaning rag. 15 years had elapsed since they cruelly abandoned me at that remote gas station. And now they were standing right here within my establishment, my turf. I didn't move, just watching as they chose a designated booth near the window and sat down. Their speaking voices were lowered, yet instantly recognizable. I certainly could have retreated, allowing the assigned waitress to handle their presence, but an inner impulse compelled me to approach them. Maybe it was raw anger, maybe simply the fundamental need to confront and conclude the situation. I quickly grabbed a full coffee carafe more, for securing something to hold onto then for any serving necessity, and walked directly towards their table. Chloe noticed me first. Her eyes immediately widened, and her mouth dropped open in shock. "Oh my goodness! It truly is you!" she exclaimed, her voice noticeably unsteady, suggesting she hadn't prepared for this direct encounter. Stephanie casually leaned back, exhibiting her customary self-satisfied smirk. "Hello there! Look at you, the important entrepreneur," she taunted mockingly. Isla looked upwards briefly, then rapidly lowered her gaze, her hands nervously manipulating the provided menu. I stood firm, the coffee pot held securely in my grip, observing them older, seemingly worn down, and demonstrating a level of desperation I hadn't expected. "What precisely do you want?" I demanded, keeping my response concise, my voice sounding harsher than I felt internally. Chloe shifted uneasily, leaning forward slightly, her fingers interlocking nervously. "Mike, could we possibly have a conversation, please?" she pleaded. I maintained my standing position. "I had no intention of sitting. I am currently working." "Speak now," I insisted. She swallowed heavily, momentarily glancing towards Stephanie seeking validation, then commenced speaking. We urgently require your assistance." Her life had utterly collapsed. Her artistic small enterprise failed completely. Her mariage, involving some individual whose identity was unknown to me, had completely disintegrated, and she was now financially ruined, openly begging for support. Stephanie interjected, adopting a casual tone as if the request were insignificant. "You are clearly succeeding, correct? 3 diner locations. We simply require a small helping hand. You understand, for the sake of past history." Isla offered a barely audible nod of agreement. "Just a minimal amount of help," she whispered faintly. I listened intently, permitting the full weight of the appeal to sink in, Chloe's dramatic story of woe, Stephanie's attempt at persuasive charm, Isla's manipulative use of guilt. They had meticulously orchestrated this confrontation. They had successfully tracked me down. They fully expected me to immediately capitulate, just as I had habitually done previously. I remained standing, the coffee pot still hot in my grasp, watching them visually squirm under my gaze. Chloe's eyes began to well up with moisture. Stephanie's mocking smirk briefly faltered. Isla systematically tore the edge of her paper menu into small pieces. I vividly recalled her extensive LinkedIn surveillance, 27 profile views, followed by their abrupt arrival here, thinking I would instinctively surrender because of my past patterns. "Wait right here," I instructed, turning away decisively. I walked directly towards the manager's office, a tiny, cramped enclosure containing a desk and a substantial pile of receipts. My heavy work boots echoed loudly on the flooring. They wanted money. After callously abandoning me with nothing, laughing about it, they genuinely believed I would simply provide them with cash. I deliberately sat down, the chair emitting a distinct creaking sound, and stared blankly at the wall surface. My hands shook marginally, not due to fear, but intense anger. I could have verbally abused them, forcefully ejected them from the premises, but I maintained control. I retrieved a standard envelope, carefully wrote out a check amount, and returned to the dining area. They were still seated there, whispering nervously, their heads immediately snapping up as I approached. I placed the sealed envelope directly in front of Chloe, watching as her fingers quickly grabbed it, her face momentarily illuminating with expectation. She immediately opened the envelope. The check amount was $73.50. This figure represented the precise cost required for a Greyhound bus ticket from Grand Junction back to their original location. The price 15 years in the past. Her momentary smile instantly vanished, and her breath caught audibly. Stephanie aggressively snatched the check, staring intensely at me with visible anger. What in the world is the meaning of this sum? She snapped, defensively. I leaned closer towards the table, maintaining a low, steady vocal tone. That amount represents what it would have personally cost me to return to your location on that specific day. One chose not to utilize those funds. You will receive absolutely nothing beyond that figure. Chloe's mouth opened slightly, but no audible sound emerged. Stephanie furiously shoved the check back towards me. You are a complete jerk, Mike. After every historical event, she yelled accusingly. I interrupted her speech immediately. After every historical event, you people abandoned me. You openly laughed at my plight. Consider this gesture as me demonstrating unusual generosity. Isla visibly flinched, her hand curling into a fist, but she chose to remain silent. I stood upright, looking directly at the three women. Chloe appeared pallid. Stephanie was openly fuming, and Isla seemed to physically shrink in size. It is now time for you to depart, I announced, ensuring my volume was sufficient for the surrounding patrons to hear. Do not attempt your première tournée away, towards the counter. My heart beating fiercely, but my steps remained assured. The assigned waitress paused nearby, clearly uncertain how to proceed, but I waved her away. They are finished, I confirmed, quickly grabbing a cloth to dry my hands. They remained seated for approximately a minute, visibly stunned, then abruptly stood up. Chloe rapidly forced the envelope into her handbag. Stephanie continued muttering angrily, with Isla trailing quietly behind. The door chimed shut loudly, and the diner rapidly reverted to its usual operational status. Coffee was poured, forks gently clinking, as if they had never momentarily entered the premises. I stood securely positioned behind the counter, pouring myself a restorative cup, my hands now feeling perfectly steady. They had arrived explicitly, begging for assistance, fully expecting me to yield to their demands, and I had definitively refused them. The rejection was not characterized by noise or dramatic. Confrontation it was simply cold and conclusive. Final, I slowly drank the coffee, noticing its bitter taste, and observed the regular patrons engaging in quiet conversation, completely unaware of the recent confrontation. Chloe's attempt at tears, Stephanie's overt hostility, these elements held no significance anymore. I'd given them what they'd given me, just enough to walk away. The diner's persistent low hum enveloped me, my life, and they were absolutely gone. I successfully completed my work shift, securely locked the establishment, and drove home, feeling the heavy emotional weight receding further with every mile traveled. They'd tried and they'd lost. That was the ultimate outcome. I leaned against the diner's expansive front window, the glass surface cold against my forearm, watching Chloe, Stephanie, and Isla out in the gravel parking area. And now, they were engaged in a fierce argument, behaving like children caught engaging in theft. Stephanie's voice was undoubtedly loud, her hands vehemently slicing the surrounding air, her face contorted intensely, appearing as if she genuinely wished to strike something. Chloe stood stationary, the envelope crushed tightly within her fist, staring downward at the ground, her shoulders visibly slumped. Isla deliberately hung back from the dispute, her arms rigidly crossed, looking deeply distressed, as if she might suddenly flee or possibly begin crying. Maybe both reactions were imminent. I couldn't discern their actual words through the insulating glass, but there was no necessity to hear them. They had entered explicitly begging, fully believing I would submit, and I had successfully dismissed them. Now, their group dynamic was visibly deteriorating, and I simply observed the scene, feeling absolutely nothing emotionally. The descending sun was low, vividly painting the entire parking lot surface orange, causing their elongated shadows to stretch dramatically across the gravel. Stephanie aggressively poked a finger towards Chloe, her mouth moving rapidly, likely accusing her of being responsible for bringing them here and ultimately ruining their plan. Chloe slowly and wearily shook her head negatively, then forcefully crammed the check into her handbag as if it were worthless refuse. Isla subtly shifted her position, briefly glancing towards the diner, her eyes momentarily meeting mine before she quickly averted her gaze. I remained completely still, neither moving nor blinking, simply standing rigidly, my coffee mug cooling slowly on the counter behind me. They were welcome to continue arguing out there indefinitely. Their conflict held no emotional power over me. I had successfully dispensed the exact treatment they deserved. I had decisively concluded the chapter on 15 years of enduring their mistreatment, and that was the final resolution. I turned deliberately away, retrieving the mug and taking a long sip. The coffee was cold now, and noticeably bitter, but I felt indifferent. The diner maintained a quiet atmosphere, with just regular customers lingering over their pie portions. The jukebox softly played a familiar, vintage melody. I meticulously wiped down the counter surfaces, moving slowly and deliberately, permitting the cleaning rags to absorb the residues of the day. The waitresses bustled nearby, efficiently clearing tables, occasionally directing quick, curious glances my way, but keeping their silence. They knew something had happened. Those three women entering, me emerging with that envelope, but I offered no explanation. "Are you functioning well, Mike?" one asked directly, stacking collected plates. "Yes," I answered briefly and sharply, and immediately resumed wiping. I harbored no desire for their intrusive questions. I didn't want to prolong the incident. Chloe and her accompanying group were gone, and my involvement was definitively finished. Driving home, the truck's engine emitted a low, resonant growl beneath me. The road ahead remained dark, illuminated solely by my cutting headlights. My hands maintained a firm grip on the steering wheel. My mind remained fixated on the preceding scene, Chloe's reaction when she saw the specific check amount. Stephanie's visible hostility, Isla's complete silence. The act of shutting them down should have been completely satisfying, and largely it was. But there was this residual, minor irritation, a small, persistent worry I couldn't entirely dismiss. They had appeared genuinely desperate, completely defeated. Chloe especially, with her distressed narrative concerning the deterioration of her life circumstances. 15 years ago, I would have been overwhelmingly concerned. I'd have rushed after them and attempted actively to remedy the situation. Now, I had simply watched them leave. The familiar sight of my house emerged into view, lights illuminated. Sienna's car securely parked in the driveway, and I exhaled a deep breath. This stable reality was genuine. My family, my established life, not the illusions they represented. I walked in, removing my boots near the door, instantly detecting the pleasant aroma of leftover lasagna. Sienna was seated at the kitchen table, her academic papers spread widely, a pen held in her hand, undoubtedly engaged in grading again. The children were located upstairs, their voices muffled, most likely tucked into their beds, yet certainly not asleep. "Shulukep lo Arnos." "Hello," she greeted softly, then perceptively tilted her head. "Are you all right?" I confirmed with a nod, then pulled a chair and sat opposite her, placing my hands flat onto the table's surface. "They unexpectedly visited," I stated, keeping the news simple. Her eyebrows elevated slightly, but she patiently waited for details. "Chloe, Stephanie, and Isla came here specifically requesting monetary assistance. I provided them with bus fare money and instructed them forcefully to leave." She gently set down her pen, leaning back, her eyes fixed steadily on my expression. "Bus fare?" she queried, a little smile tugging her lips. I told her the exact amount, $73.50, the precise financial cost required for them to travel back from Grand Junction all those years in the past. I described Chloe's expression when her expectation failed. How Stephanie had openly raged. How I had ultimately turned and walked away. Sienna listened attentively, her hand resting calmly on the table, maintaining her characteristic composure. When I concluded my narration, she reached across the table, her fingers gently touching mine. "They are unable to seize anything from you that you don't willingly give them," she asserted, her voice carrying a firm, quiet resolution. I gazed directly at her, allowing those precise words to deeply resonate, and confirmed with a nod. "Yes," I responded, my throat suddenly constricted. She offered my hand a reassuring squeeze, then returned her focus to her grading papers, leaving me sitting there, feeling the residual heavy weight lessening slightly. She didn't require further explanation. She understood the core of the issue. She understood me, and that comprehension was entirely sufficient. We consumed the leftover food later, just the two of us, the children having finally settled down and quieted upstairs. I absent-mindedly poked at the lasagna portion, my head still partially preoccupied by the confrontation in the parking lot. Stephanie yelling, Chloe staring, Isla shrinking. It ultimately held no importance what they chose to say externally or who they chose to assign blame to. They'd come for a handout, and I'd given them a mirror instead. Sienna didn't ask more, just talked about the kids' our son's upcoming mathematics assessment. Our daughters recently developed preoccupation with sketching images of cats. I smiled, nodded my head, letting her pull me back to now. After we cleaned up, her hip gently brushing against mine near the sink, I felt fully composed again. That night, while reclining in bed, listening to Sienna's slow, rhythmic breathing next to me, I stared into the darkness of the ceiling. The house structure creaked softly, the children momentarily shifting in their respective rooms, and I mentally reviewed the entire incident. Those three women inside my diner, then outside in the parking area, visibly fracturing under the pressure. They couldn't touch this. My family, my diners, my identity. I'd shut the door, locked it tight, and they were on the other side where they belonged. The minor irritation persisted, certainly, but its strength was rapidly diminishing. Sienna was right. They got nothing unless I voluntarily granted it to them. And I'd effectively given them the conclusion. I closed my eyes, permitting the day's events to recede, and slept soundly, permanently finished with the specters of their past influence. I stood within the confines of our kitchen, actively stirring a pot of homemade chili simmering on the stove, the pervasive scent of various spices filling the ambient air. Several weeks had elapsed since Chloe, Stephanie, and Isla had unexpectedly visited my diner since I'd handed them that specific $73.50 check and subsequently watched them argue in the parking area. I hadn't seen them since that day, not a single call, not one email, not even a subtle indication on LinkedIn. They were truly gone, genuinely gone this time. And I could profoundly sense the relief. A deep sense of peaceful quietude that settled over everything, much like the calm following a powerful storm. Life proceeded routinely. Sienna diligently grading academic papers at the table. The children actively chasing each other throughout the backyard area. The diner establishments consistently thriving with regular patronage. It was entirely mine. All of it. And they completely lacked the capacity to impact it. I'd ceased instinctively looking over my shoulder. I'd stopped anticipating the next unwanted intrusion. The chili mixture bubbled gently, steam ascending, and I performed a taste test. It definitely required additional salt, perhaps a sharper hint of pepper. Sienna briefly glanced up from her immense stack of tests, her reading glasses sliding slightly down her nose. "The aroma is wonderful," she commented, offering that subtle smile I loved. It certainly retorted, greening back, and she has leave. The children burst abruptly into the kitchen from outside, our son triumphantly waving a stick covered in mud. Our daughter loudly announcing a bug she had successfully located. "Get out, both of you, and thoroughly wash up," I ordered emphatically, pointing explicitly towards the sink area, and they grumbled slightly but complied, splashing water everywhere in the process. It was complete chaos, noisy and disorganized, but it belonged entirely to us. Chloe's face, the insincere tears she tried to sell me, faded marginally more each day, successfully substituted by this tangible reality. My employment was also highly satisfactory. I divided my time strategically across the 3 diner locations, cooking hamburgers, meticulously verifying inventory levels, and engaging in lighthearted banter with the waitresses. The established clientele now recognized me personally, Old Tom with his specific coffee order, the truck driver known for generous tipping, the woman who perpetually requested supplementary napkins. They would always nod their acknowledgement, stating "hello, Mike," and I would reciprocate the nod, experiencing a genuine sense of belonging. Jacqueline stopped by the initial diner location one morning. Her tattoos were noticeably faded, but her intense glare remained sharply focused. "You haven't managed to ruin it," she declared, carefully observing the surroundings, then offered a quick, approving pat on my shoulder before leaving abruptly. That constituted extremely high praise coming from her. I chuckled quietly to myself, while pouring coffee for a customer's table, reflecting upon the extensive distance I had successfully traveled from being a nobody abandoned at a gas station to achieving this present success. I no longer dedicated time to checking Chloe's activities. No utilization of fabricated social media accounts. No late-night, unnecessary scrolling through data. I had performed that action once many years prior, witnessing her portrayal of the grieving, abandoned spouse. But now, I felt no need whatsoever to possess that information. She existed somewhere in the world, living whatever life she had managed to create subsequent to her business collapse and her marriage failure. Stephanie and Isla were also out there, possibly still holding resentment, possibly still blaming her. It held absolutely no significance. They had approached me pleading, and I had firmly sealed the door to the past. That single check for $73.50 was the final thing I would ever provide them. Precisely enough for them to permanently leave, just as they had forced me to do. I experienced no remorse. I harbored no feelings of guilt. I felt entirely free. Sienna and I took the children to the designated park that weekend. It was a cool autumn day, the sound of leaves audibly crunching beneath our footwear. Our son ran ahead energetically, kicking a ball, while our daughter clung tightly to my hand, enthusiastically pointing out every passing squirrel. Sienna walked consistently alongside me, her arm occasionally brushing mine, and we maintained a comfortable silence, simply observing, breathing, and experiencing life. I briefly considered Chloe her unexpected arrival, the crack in her voice, and, consciously, dismissed the thought. She utterly lacked the ability to take this moment away from me. She couldn't even approach that level of influence. I'd built it all without her interference, despite her previous efforts. And this existence was significantly superior to anything she had ever offered. "You seem preoccupied," Sienna remarked, gently nudging me. "Simply content," I replied, and she squeezed my hand affectionately, understanding the sincerity of my statement. Upon returning home, we consumed the leftover chili. Excessively spicy, the children loudly complained, yet they rapidly finished their portions anyway. I sat comfortably at the dining table, observing them argue playfully over the last remaining bread roll. Sienna subtly rolled her eyes at their sustained noise. This simple reality was my revenge, if one insisted on labeling it as such. Not characterized by some major conflict. Not achieved by rubbing my success in their faces. Simply living authentically and living successfully. Chloe had intended for me to break down, to humiliatingly beg for my return. And I hadn't. I'd walked definitively away from that remote gas station, away from her influence, and continued my forward progression. Roy at the homeless shelter, Jacqueline's operational diner, Sienna's genuine laughter. Teskid. Every single step forward was my own volition, every single component hard-earned. They had ultimately lost the contest. Not because I had actively defeated them in a confrontation, but because I had permanently stopped participating in their manipulative game. The days persisted in their regular sequence: school runs, diner shifts, quiet nights with Sienna on the couch. I made no attempt to look backwards. I didn't need to do so. Chloe was merely a receding memory, an immaterial shadow that possessed no power to reach me anymore. I'd see her sometimes in a flash, her smirk, her tears, but the memory failed to linger. I'd simply increase the radio volume, flip another hamburger, or affectionately hug my daughter, and the image would completely fade. The diners continued to flourish. The kids grew rapidly. Sienna and I argued over trivial matters, such as whose turn it was to perform the lawn maintenance. Our life was simple, occasionally chaotic, yet absolutely perfect. I'd wake up early, brew fresh coffee, stand quietly in our kitchen gazing out at the yard, and feel the powerful presence of peace-deep, unwavering stability. One specific night, after the children were securely tucked into bed, I sat outside on the porch, a beer held casually in my hand. The air feeling refreshingly cool against my exposed skin. Sienna emerged from inside, wrapped cozily in a soft blanket, and sat down companionably beside me. "What thoughts are currently occupying your mind?" she inquired, her voice gentle. I took a lengthy sip of beer, staring up into the expanse of stars. "Nothing important," I replied initially, then smiled. "Everything meaningful." She gently rested her head upon my shoulder, and we sat together in comfortable silence. Chloe was definitively gone, truly gone. And I was here now, completely whole. The most effective revenge was ultimately not revenge at all. It was simply this exact moment. A life so thoroughly positive that I had no need to prove anything to anyone. I had successfully achieved my self-reliance, and that realization was absolutely sufficient.